Hello and good day, everyone. You are tuning in to the Undeniable Podcast, an ambitious foray into the exciting, yet not often enough explored world of excellence in the Virgin Islands. I am Shea Alexander, the host of this series of exciting conversations, and I am the founder and principal consultant of OAC Group, a multidisciplinary consulting firm offering strategic growth and business development solutions. Undeniable has been curated for those keen to learn from individuals at the height of their career. Together, we'll enjoy frank discourse and unpack what it means and takes to be great undeniably. Undeniable leans on OAC Group's extensive network of clients, partners, and friends to feature an impressive roster of industry leaders and brilliant minds in riveting, unscripted conversations monthly. So, hello again, everyone. This is Shea Alexander, your host, the principal consultant of O'Neill Alexander Consulting Group. And today, I also happen to be, as I mentioned in the first part of episode 3, the guest as well. So, I will be having more of a direct, frank, and honest conversation with you guys as my listeners, but also, and I think for me, probably most importantly, also with myself. One of the things that has really driven me to success as a consultant is being able to have internal dialogue, being able to run things by myself, critique myself, and improve on my own ideas in a way that really allows me to really build things to their best internal potential before I introduce them to the outside world, whether it is to my clients, to my consumers, to my listeners, or to whomever the audience is that I'm trying to target. And that, of course, brings me to the main topic of today's episode, or today's part of the episode 3. In the promotion for episode 3, which is, of course, my first solo episode, and I'm super excited about this, I coined it as Shea Alexander on O'Neill Alexander Consulting Group, Deliberate Audience Building, and Audacity. And of course, in episode 3's first part, which you guys would have caught last week, I started to delve into the idea of audience building, but I really attacked it from a more universal concept, which is the idea of community. So if you were able to catch episode 3's first part, which again aired last week, and I hope you were, if you want, podcasts don't expire, feel free to run it back, catch that content, and then follow up with me here. I spoke about the idea not so much of an audience, but the idea of a community. And of course, in the first part of this episode, I kind of started with, some kind of funny but also serious apologies as to some misdirection in my introduction, and also some technical issues. So I think for today I will have to start with what I hope for my pride's sake is the final apology around this podcast series. Again, of course, it's a little bit more on the lighthearted side, but when I put together the promotion and the title for this episode, like I said, I called it Shea Alexander on O'Neill Alexander Consulting Group, Deliberate Audience Building, and Audacity. But I think as I started having the conversation with you guys and with myself, that was part 1 of episode 3, I started to recognize that for O'Neill Alexander Consulting Group, and for me both personally and as a professional, I have learned the value of audiences. Of course, in business, they are critical, particularly when you're somebody like myself, really entrenched in the world of marketing, stakeholder engagement, etc. But one of the things that's also, I think, more universally important and does encompass the idea of an audience is the point of building community. So if you would bear with me, in terms of speaking towards that more technical aspect of this episode, I actually want to have more of a conversation with you guys around the idea of building a community. Because as I will kind of delve into as we talk a bit longer, an audience is in fact one of the more critical communities that business people have. But community is a broader term that applies, of course, to any like-minded group of individuals or even entities, organizations, countries who in particular share a certain goal or value system or belief system. So when you think of your audience as whether it is that you're an entertainer or business person or whomever else has an audience, because We all have audiences. We all have people that are paying attention to us. The community that is an audience is essentially a group of people or entities linked by this entertainer or this business person. Essentially, this source of edification or entertainment or enlightenment, whatever that might be. But what binds that community, what makes the audience a community, is that they are bound by their desire to be a part of that ecosystem and to hear and to learn from and to listen and to engage with. So let's talk today about the general idea of building community. Whether you have been paying attention to the Undeniable podcast or simply paying attention to me as Shea Alexander or paying attention to the work of myself as a consultant or more broadly my firm, O'Neill Alexander Consulting Group, I think it would have become very, very apparent to you that communities are extremely important to me as a professional, but also, like I said, in my personal life. Why are communities important? A lot of the work that I have done is around the idea of branding, and it is around the idea of communications in a very broad sense. So we can think of some of the arms of communication that are a bit more technical and serve more specific purposes, right? For example, you can think of marketing, you can think of public relations, you can think of business development, which is kind of like more direct towards sales and engaging your consuming audience. And what I have found is that for a business to be extremely successful, so whether that business was my own effort as O'Neill Alexander Consulting Group or Sekani, my online boutique, or the efforts of the clients with whom I was consulting, whatever firm or government personality or elected official or whomever that was, communities were very important because especially in the smaller islands that we live in, communities are your key marketing component. Because as we all know, I think as we all should know, a lot of what happens in terms of generating sales and interest for a business or an organization in the British Virgin Islands come from what people typically call word of mouth, what I sometimes call hearsay. So I consume the product, whether it is I buy the bag, or I eat the burger, or I use the maintenance service, and I decide this service was of X quality, and X quality inspires X feeling in me that I want to then let other people know about. And of course, we know that X can be either negative or positive. So it can be, this burger was delicious, it made me feel very satisfied, and I want to tell other people about this super delicious burger that they can get over at the Pear Park or wherever that burger place is. Or it can be, this maintenance service was very unsatisfactory. It left me feeling disappointed and frustrated, and I want to tell people, whether it is that I'm deliberately telling them to avoid it or not, I want to tell people about my bad experience, which in turn increases the likelihood of them not being interested in taking up that service. So, in thinking about building communities, we're thinking about the real potent nature that they have as amplifiers and augmenters of what you're doing from a communications perspective. Because nobody carries your message further or better than your community does. And the reason for that, and this is why the word community is slightly different in this case from simply an audience. An audience, like I said, is a specific community in that you could kind of think of them chiefly as more so listeners. But the reason I'm using community today is because communities have different facets and different persons, and they are a bit more multi-dimensioned in what function they can solve. So a community doesn't just listen, but a community also evangelizes. So a community does the active work of saying, we have subscribed to this brand, or we have subscribed to this product, or we have subscribed to this ideology, and we want to actively carry it forth and witness on behalf of this brand and say to people, have you heard about Sekani? It is really the best. And so cultivating a community does not just come down to altruism or good-hearted feelings. It comes down to a strictly economic sense of amplifying your message and creating a likelihood of conversion in terms of new leads, new sales, and new customers. So we have an understanding of what a community is. Like I said, fundamentally, a community is just a group of entities that share some sort of value, belief system, hope, goal, etc. They don't necessarily have to be demographically similar, but oftentimes when you think about communities, particularly in a sort of anthropological sense, there are demographic traits that make them similar, right? So you could think of, for example, the Virgin Gorda community. What are the things that make up that community and make the persons within that community demographically similar, right? But, that might be a bit of a tangent that we don't need to go on today. So, we're talking about community building, and when I was thinking to myself about how you really build a community, it's a very, very nuanced effort. And I think more importantly than just building community is the idea of maintaining it. So I developed 5 sort of stages or steps or facets to the idea of community building that I want to share with you guys today. And I want you to really think about this in the context of your own efforts and in the context of your own business. Because fundamentally, one of the things that makes communities such an interesting phenomena is that no one community is exactly the same. So what I said today, it may not feel immediately to you as applicable, but what I would encourage you to do is to think not of the specific examples or motivations or genders that I might share, but to think instead of the general applicability of what I am saying and how you can apply that in the context of the communities that you need to cultivate. So, without further ado, let's talk about building communities. The first thing that you need to do to build a community is to first look internally. And this is relationships 101. Anybody, any person, any professional, any consultant, any boutique owner, any firm that is deciding that they need to build communities, or rather, even more generally, that they want to enter into a relationship, because communities are really defined by collective and individual relationships, you first have to make some internally critical decisions. And this applies to anything that you're doing, whether it is building relationships, building community, setting a budget, recruiting staff. You first have to know yourself or know your organization. So I know in compliance there's the term know your customer. First know yourself. KYS. What is it that determines or defines what my organization is interested in, right? So what is the vision of my organization? Do we want to change the way BVI landlords think about cheese? Do we want to change the way BVI landlords think about the rights of women? Do we want to be able to, in the next 5 years, build our own building as opposed to paying rent? Do we want to transform the luxury tourism product in the British Virgin Islands? And visions don't have to be too broad. They also don't have to be specific, but they have to exist. Because in your day-to-day activities, in your day-to-day doings, you have to have some sort of driving motivation that colors your perspective and colors your actions and gives purpose to what it is you're doing every day. So what is the vision of your organization and what are the goals of your organization? You first have to have that internal conversation, whether that means truly internally or internally as in within the walls and bowels of your organization, that tell you and give you purpose and definition around who you are. Because you can't build communities around yourself if you don't even know what yourself is. Communities that you build intentionally, the foundation of them fundamentally is in fact you, or rather your vision, your values, your purpose. So you have to know what those are so that you can communicate them clearly and boldly and start to bring in, and I'll use that word I use again, to start bringing those evangelicals to your cause. When you have identified who you are, and what you are aiming to accomplish, you then start to think strategically, and we use the word strategically in part 1 of this episode. You then start to think strategically about what resources, what frameworks, what structures, what personnel, what do I need to accomplish what it is my goals are, or what do I need to actualize my vision. And one of the key questions that you have to ask yourself in there are, who are the stakeholders? So who are the people that are affected by this decision? Who are the people that are necessary for this to happen? Who are the people that also want this to happen? And there are a lot of different questions that you can ask yourself. And like I said, it does depend on the context. So if you are, for example, I have had elected officials as clients, both on the campaign trail and when they were in ministerial positions in government. Their stakeholders tend to be the entire country, but then there are also more specific communities or groups of stakeholders in there, you know? So who are the people that work in the departments that are within your portfolio? Who are the people that are part of your actual constituency, because they have to really support you for you to get back in to be able to do anything of consequence? Who are the business people that are in and around your portfolio and whose taxes are critical for you to get your work done? And of course, one of the important things with identifying those stakeholders is to understand what I think I'd refer to as the dimension or degree of relevance. So what exactly is it that they bring, and to what extent do they bring that? Because not every community is that close to the purpose or the project. Not every stakeholder is that close to you. But it is important that whether they are 5 feet away or right on your chest, you understand that distance and you understand why that distance exists. So who are the stakeholders? To what dimensions or to what degree are they important, and what purpose do they serve? Now, one of the most critical questions with the idea of community, and I will correct myself as I say this, but if you want to build strong, sustainable communities, you have to gather around certain values and principles. Now, communities can form around anything. So communities can form around a specific feeling. We don't like this thing that happened. Communities can form around a movement. We want to push for X thing to happen. But for community to really exist in a permanent way, they have to form around something permanent and not temporal. And one of the most lasting things that exist are the ideas of principles. So if you've ever read, and I'm sure most people have read it long before I did, because I only just finished reading it as a part of my 30 minutes of reading a day. But if you've ever read Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the things that's really centered, or that book is centered on, is the idea of principles as these long-lasting, immutable concepts, right? So the idea of doing right for doing right's sake, the idea of prioritizing appropriately, the idea of being proactive. He defines these things as principles that are immutable in their rightness, and they can't be changed. They're not inapplicable in X context and applicable in the next. And he differentiates between values and principles, but I think my contention for the purpose of this podcast is that you can use principles and values sort of interchangeably, with the sole concept being that there's something that is really in people's hearts and minds as a lasting idea that cements their interest in being a part of this community, and that binds the persons within the community or the organizations within the community together. Now, if you want to think of those principles and values as, I would say, the oxygen, right? So the thing that keeps you alive, or the thing that keeps the community alive. The next thing on my list would probably be the blood. So those of you that understand biology, and I recently learned that not many people actually understand what blood is for, but blood's main purpose, and perhaps I myself am wrong, but I stand corrected if I am, blood's main purpose, as I recall from studying human and social biology in school, is really to circulate oxygen through the body. So your red blood cells circulate circulate oxygen through the body, which is why the redder blood is considered to be oxygenated. But I will stop with the science there, because I'm sure I've already put my foot in my mouth. But generally speaking, if those principles and values are the oxygen, reciprocity is the blood. So reciprocity is what keeps the principles and values in transaction. It's what keeps the currency moving through the economy of the community. Because as you can imagine, money is extremely valuable. But money has no value if it's not being transmitted from hand to hand. If money is not moving hands and being exchanged via transactions, it's almost of no value. So think of reciprocity as the transactions that move value throughout your community. And reciprocity is extremely important, and it should go without saying, but I think a lot of modern philosophies for success and for business in particular have encouraged people to be extraordinarily selfish. So you think of building a community or building an audience, and your thought process is, what I am doing is just so important or just so right that people should automatically align with me. But one of the critical things that you have to understand is human nature is inherently selfish. For me to feel motivated to do something, I have to be getting something back. And that something does not have to be tangible. What that something can be is a good feeling. That could be what I'm transacting for. I am being a part of this community, and I am doing this thing that drives the community because it makes me feel good. But I have to be getting something out of the equation to stay motivated and to stay current in the happenings of this community. So think a lot about the reciprocity that drives your communities. What is it that motivates people to keep moving? You know why they are here, those values and principles. But what is it that keeps them apart? What is it that keeps them transacting? What is it that keeps them engaged and active in the community? What are they getting and giving on a daily basis? And then the fifth one, which you can think of starters as separate and apart, but still the fifth and still extremely important, is the idea of feedback. Now, I know in episode 1, I think the second part of it with Dr. Rubin, I referred to a feedback loop. And while from a strictly sort of, connecting of words, I'm sure you guys understood what I meant by that, which is essentially just feedback coming back into the system or coming back into the process to allow it to then improve on itself and to strengthen itself. And that kind of goes around in a cycle or loop. When I Googled the term, because I just had a feeling that I had encountered this term somewhere else, I realized that a feedback loop is actually a very specific, I think, engineering and system design term. But for my purposes, like I explained, all I'm referring to when I say a feedback loop, particularly in the idea of a community, is spaces and places and opportunities for the individuals and organizations in the community to render feedback back into the system and back into the community that allows for critical functions, for example, the values and principles, the reciprocity, the language used in the community to be consistently maintained, reflected back in what happens, and when necessary, improved upon. Because there are, especially in this 21st century, especially in the time of social media, people are inundated with options. Every single day, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, Facebook shows me groups that I think they sort of string together based on my browsing history and the things I like to buy and the things I like to watch. They show me groups of what are essentially communities that they want to recommend that I join. I recently joined one that was a House of the Dragon community, and it was shocking to me how much energy, time, and excitement you could get out of that. So I say that to say, people have a lot of options now in terms of what communities they want to invest themselves in. Some are simply digital and virtual, but even those can take up a lot of time and space. So when it comes to your organization, you really have to be putting the effort in to maintaining a community environment that is interesting and engaging and reflective of those core values and principles and purpose that keeps people involved. So now let me dial back the whole general term of community and apply it more specifically to the idea of your business's audience. So first, we spoke about knowing yourself. That kind of goes straight across the board. Knowing your organization, right? Knowing what is the goal and what is the vision of your organization. So I've communicated to you guys probably a dozen times, despite the fact that this is only episode 3, the purpose of the Undeniable series. I really want to allow people to have real-world examples of BVI success and to empower them with the tools to replicate that success on their own terms. So my vision is empowered, competent, confident young BVI landers. And the goal is, as I said, first. So I know what it is that I'm attempting to do with the podcast. Who are my stakeholders? So there are a couple key ones that I could identify. The first and most obvious one are my listeners. So the people that actually, whether it is perpetually or once and again, actually tune in to the podcast, those are my listeners. They are a key stakeholder because they are the people that I'm chiefly trying to serve, right? Another key group of stakeholders for me would be the people who I invite and who I want to invite onto the podcast. So those persons, like I described, at the height of their career, I've had Dr. Rain and Dr. Smith on so far. I have two other really exciting guests for this season, which is this kind of 6-month period. And then I really am starting to develop a really exciting guest list for next season, which will probably start in January of 2025 as well. That's another group of stakeholders. I could also think, though, about my clients because I want them to think of this as something that adds value to the OAC group and, of course, then add value to the ecosystem that they are part of. And there are tons and tons of other potential and real stakeholders. For example, the potential advertisers who may in the past decide, I want to start putting ads on the Undeniable podcast series. They may not exist now. They may not even be a group of people I'm deliberately thinking about now. But of course, with any sort of digital effort, one of the things in the back of your head, if it's not already, should be, can I monetize this? Can I get advertisers for this? So those are some of the key stakeholders. What are the values and principles that define my community? I want every single person, whether it is a potential advertiser, or potential guest, or potential listener, to be interested in progress. I want them to be people who are not afraid of change, who are not afraid of looking truth in the face and discussing it. And I want them to be people who value honesty, transparency, and change above everything else. I want them to be people who value the principle of patriotism and who understand the point and purpose of putting your own young people first. And the list goes on, but I think those are some of the core ones that would define the communities in and around the Undeniable podcast series. What is the reciprocity that will bind the community? That's a really good one. So for me, because of course, even though I'm a singular entity, I am a really important stakeholder here as well because I am doing all of the work to get this out there. I have to feel like I am getting value from doing this. And that value can come in different ways. Like I said earlier, one of the key things I get from this is the ability to have candid conversations with myself. This is also helping me build confidence, and there are a lot of other things that I get from this from a business perspective and from a personal perspective. I would like for listeners to feel as though they are learning something and that they are part of a community or an ecosystem or an environment that is really geared towards empowering and inspiring them. I would like my guests to feel that they are supporting the development of young people. I would like them to feel, of course, that they are increasing their reach to some extent, even though, my guests are really heavy hitters themselves. So I think they increase my reach more than I increase theirs. And of course, just because I mentioned them, potential advertisers, I think, of course, I'd want them to feel like they're getting reach and they're getting economic value from working with me on this podcast series. And then, of course, feedback. And I think that obviously goes without saying for something like a podcast. One of my biggest critics, and I've mentioned this before on this podcast, is myself. I listen back to every episode several times in the editing and in the reviewing, but also when I've published it, and I talk to myself about what I could improve on. But I also ask people actively, what did you like? What did you not like? I gave the example of one of my friends who called to say, Shea, you were talking too fast, and how much that helped me. So all of these are the things that I have done to understand, build, and maintain the audience around the Undeniable podcast series. And you can do the same. But in building an audience, and also in everything else that you do as a business person or as a professional, I want to encourage you to be audacious. And I want to tell you why I use the word audacious and not the word confident or the word bold. I know that there are a lot of radio and television personalities in the British Virgin Islands who simply like synonyms because they like synonyms. But I'm very precise about language, and I don't exchange one word for the next just because it sounds more dramatic. I use the word audacious because of the word that it's rooted in, which is audacity. the idea of just really being so extravagantly bold and different and out there, right? It's I mean, the word has almost connotations of arrogance, but what I think it really speaks to is really being willing to be outside of the norm and bold about it. Why is audacity important for you as a business person? I think the first and most obvious one to most people, and the one to which it probably feels the most synonymous, is audacity is a lot about, but it also reinforces your confidence. And you cannot move around successfully as a business person or just as a professional if you don't feel confident. Because, and this brings me to point two, you cannot convince people of the value of your product or of yourself, and you cannot convert them into evangelicals for your brand and for your mission if you yourself cannot communicate audaciously what it is you believe in. And this is part of why I use the word audacity. Confidence is, I am aware of X, whether it is something about myself or something about my environment, and I am certain about it. Audacity is, I believe this thing that is potentially outside of what I even have proof of, but I am very bold about expressing it and confident that I can get us there. So audacity is about not just convincing people of the merit of something, because it's easy to convince people of the merit of change. It's not difficult for me to say to you, it would be better if women got equal pay. I think most people would say, yes, that sounds good, that makes sense. What audacity is needed for is to really convince people, not only is this thing right, but I can take us there. I can shift the paradigm so greatly and turn reality on its head to such an extent that I can get us beyond where we are right now. And I think most critically, coming back to the internal, audacity is about consistent drive. So audacity tells me, I don't know of many consultants in the British Virgin Islands doing what I am trying to do. I have never seen what I am trying to do applied in the BVI reality, but I will make it reality. And audacity is what has allowed me to convince client after client, yes, I have never done a recruitment project, but allow me to do it for you and watch me do it extremely well. And to actually do it well, and you can ask my clients, I have never handled a real estate matter, but allow me to help you with it and I will do it and do it extremely well. And I have done so extremely well. Audacity is what particularly helps me as a marketing professional, but also in stakeholder engagement. Audacity is what has taken me into the rooms in the last several months and in every instance allowed me to leave with a yes. Your fee is fine, your quote is fine, or even more titillating to hear as a business person, it's a bit high, but we believe in your value. And audacity really starts with believing in yourself. You cannot shift the environment, you cannot shift the reality if you do not believe that you can. And I want to temper this with the idea of practicality, because anybody who knows me knows that I am practical, perhaps to a fault, but being practical and being audacious are not opposites. I understand what I can do, and that is why I'm extremely bold and confident about what I can do. And while I understand the limits of reality as it exists now, I understand how reality can be bent and to what extent. So I've never believed in telling children, you can do anything, because you can't do anything. There are things you cannot do. But what I believe in telling children is, if you pay attention to the resources that you have, again, thinking strategically, if you pay attention to the resources that you have, the expertise, the knowledge, the intention, the drive, the ability to pin two things together and make them three, not two, three, because that's about synergy and adding value. If you understand those things about yourself, you can start to look out into the box that is the world and say, okay, I can't cross over that edge, but I can go to that edge and push it out a bit and step out on that extra bit and push it out even further and keep pushing until the box has been warped beyond recognition. But I didn't do the impossible. I did the possible that I knew I could do because I was audacious but also practical. So I want to thank you guys for listening, and of course, I want to encourage you to be audacious and to think really critically about building your communities. I want to encourage you to keep listening. I'm really excited about my fourth episode and the third guest that I'm going to have. And the fourth guest I'm going to have, I'm super excited about as well. But thank you so much for listening to the Undeniable Podcast, and I look forward to having more and more and more conversations with you guys as we grow, learn, and inspire each other. Thank you so much, and have a good one.